I'm Claire Bennett, 22, and 2 weeks ago I collapsed on stage in front of 3,000 people. On the morning I was supposed to give the valedictorian speech, a doctor told me I had a brain tumor. They said surgery had to happen immediately, and the nurses kept trying to reach my parents for consent. 3 days later, I woke to machines, IV tubes, and a silence so sharp it felt colder than the room. I expected worried faces around my bed. But the first thing I saw was my sister's smiling Instagram post. My whole family stood before the Eiffel Tower with a caption that read, "Family trip in Paris, no stress." I said nothing, left no comment, made no call, and stared until the image burned straight through me. Then 65 missed calls from my father filled my screen, along with one message that simply said, "We need you." That was the moment I understood they were not calling because they missed me or feared losing me. They were calling because they needed something else, and that truth hurt worse than the surgery stitches. Before I tell you why, like and subscribe only if you truly want to hear where this story ends. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because this story still feels unreal. To explain any of it, I need to take you back 4 weeks, to when everything began falling apart. 4 weeks before graduation, I stood in my childhood kitchen while my mother flipped wedding magazines. They were not for me, of course. They were for Vanessa Bennett, my older sister, newly engaged. Since the ring appeared on her hand, the whole house revolved around her dates, dresses, and preferences. "Claire Bennett, can you pick up the napkin samples tomorrow?" my mother asked without looking up at me. I told her I had finals, but she just said I would manage, because I always managed everything. That is what happens when you become the reliable one. People stop seeing effort and expect endless service. For 4 years, I worked 25 hours a week while keeping a perfect GPA and funding myself. Scholarships, coffee shop tips, and exhaustion paid my tuition, while my parents covered every cost for Vanessa Bennett. I tried to sound casual when I told my mother I needed something to wear for graduation weekend. I asked if maybe we could shop together, just once, before the ceremony I had earned with everything. She finally looked up, then said I was great at finding deals online and would figure it out. Her attention drifted right back to bridal magazines, ribbon samples, floral notes, and party seating plans. I reminded her graduation was important too, but her voice sharpened the second I said the word. She said Vanessa Bennett was bringing her fiancé's parents, and everything had to be perfect for them. I nodded the way I always nodded, because arguing in that house never made me feel more visible. Later that night, I folded laundry in my old room and heard my mother talking to her friend Linda Parker. She bragged that I was valedictorian, then laughed that the timing was terrible beside the engagement party. She said Claire Bennett understood because she was independent, and everyone said that like it was praise. Independent was their favorite word for me, when what they really meant was forgettable and convenient. That night I called the only person who ever asked how I was, instead of what I could do. Grandpa Arthur Bennett answered on the second ring and said he had just been thinking about me. Something in my chest loosened at the sound of his voice, warm and steady and genuinely glad. He asked about finals, my thesis, and the speech I had rewritten 6 times out of pure fear. For 20 minutes, I talked about my work, my panic, and the pressure of standing before thousands. When I finished, he asked whether I had my dress, my shoes, and whether I needed anything. My throat tightened because he noticed the things my own parents had never even bothered to ask. I told him I was fine, and he went quiet in the way people do when they know you are lying. Then he said Grandma Evelyn Bennett would have been so proud and that I had her spirit. I never met Grandma Evelyn Bennett, but everyone said I had her dark hair and stubborn chin. Grandpa Arthur Bennett promised he would be front row at graduation and miss it for nothing on earth. Then he told me he had something for me, a gift my grandmother wanted me to have one day. Before I could ask more, Vanessa Bennett burst into my room without knocking and demanded her dry shampoo. I covered the phone, told her I never used her things, and she rolled her eyes as usual. She flashed her engagement ring, muttered a thin congratulations about valedictorian, and walked right back out. Grandpa Arthur Bennett had heard all of it, and his silence over the phone said more than words. 1 week before graduation, I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep, coffee, and pure resentment. Finals were finished. My thesis was submitted, and I was working double shifts because rent was due. I refused to ask my parents for help, because any help from them later returned as ammunition. My head had been pounding for 3 straight days, but I told myself stress could explain anything. While closing the coffee shop, my mother called and said she needed me home for the party setup. I told her I was scheduled to work, and she told me to call in sick because Vanessa Bennett needed me. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened and nearly asked, "What about what I need?" Instead, I swallowed the words, because in that family, my needs always felt like bad manners. She called me dramatic, said it was one weekend, and acted like my graduation could wait quietly. 4 years of perfect grades, work, and sacrifice meant less than one champagne party in our backyard. I told her I would come, ended the call, and felt the ache behind my eyes grow sharper. The room tilted for a second, and I had to grab the counter before the floor steadied again. My coworker, Hannah Cole, asked if I was okay, and I lied that I was only tired. That night, my nose started bleeding and would not stop for 15 long minutes under the bathroom light. I blamed the dry air, the stress, the lack of sleep, anything except the fear rising in me. On the drive home, Vanessa Bennett texted me a reminder about custom napkins and dressing nicely. She never asked how I was, thanked me for helping, or remembered I had a future too. My father texted next, asking me to pick up Aunt Susan from the airport for the party weekend. I pulled over on the roadside and stared at the screen while my hands shook on the wheel. I could not tell whether I was shaking from anger, exhaustion, or something far more dangerous. That evening, Sophie Carter showed up at my apartment with Thai food and a worried face. She pushed into my kitchen, looked at me once, and said I looked like death warmed over. Sophie Carter had been my best friend since freshman orientation and knew how my family really was. She asked when I had last slept, and I gave the useless answer people give when they are unraveling. She told me Hannah Cole said I had nearly passed out at work, and I called it dizziness. Sophie Carter said it was not finals, but family stress, and I hated how true that sounded. Then she asked the question I had stopped letting myself ask. Would they even come to graduation? I tried to say yes, but the truth sat like a stone because my mother had not mentioned it. My father kept forgetting the date, and Vanessa Bennett barely knew I was valedictorian at all. Sophie Carter reminded me they had missed every award ceremony in 4 years, every single one. When I won a teaching fellowship, only Grandpa Arthur Bennett and Sophie Carter were in the audience. She took my hand and said I did not need to keep setting myself on fire to keep them warm. My eyes burned, and for a second, I wanted to believe I could stop sacrificing myself for scraps. That night after she left, I brushed my teeth and suddenly saw 2 sinks where there should be one. My vision doubled, the headache surged back harder, and I clutched the bathroom counter until it passed. I thought I should see a doctor, but there was no time because the engagement party was tomorrow. I swallowed 2 more ibuprofen and went to bed like denial might be enough to carry me. Before sleeping, I read Sophie Carter's message. If anything happens, call your grandfather first. I did not answer her text, but I did not delete it either, and that mattered more than I knew. Vanessa Bennett's engagement party arrived with 6 straight hours of work before the first guest even smiled. I set up chairs, arranged flowers, chilled bottles, and played the silent role I had always played. The backyard glittered with white lights, a fountain, and a cake that cost more than my monthly rent. 40 guests in polished clothes toasted my sister's future while no one asked about mine at all. My mother waved for more champagne, and I carried another bottle through laughing people and clinking glasses. My head pounded so hard, it felt like the music was being played from inside my skull. Vanessa Bennett stood near the fountain, glowing with attention, and 3 glasses of champagne already gone. She pulled me close and introduced me as the little sister who does everything around here for them. People clapped politely, smiling the way strangers smile when they think a joke is harmless. Then she leaned in and said I was going to be a teacher, wiping noses for a living. Laughter drifted around us, light and dismissive, and I kept smiling because humiliation had become habit. As an afterthought, she added that I was graduating next week, but forgot what valedictorian meant. I corrected her softly, and she waved it away, saying smart did not buy designer shoes anyway. More laughter followed, and my face hurt from holding a smile that no longer resembled happiness. I escaped to the kitchen, braced myself against the counter, and tried to breathe through the dizziness. Through the window, I noticed Mr. Whitmore, an older man from my grandfather's past, watching quietly. His expression was unreadable, almost grave, like he had just witnessed something he would not forget. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number telling me my grandfather should know everything. When I looked up, Mr. Whitmore raised his glass slightly toward me, then turned and walked away. After the party, I stood alone in the kitchen scrubbing dishes while everyone admired engagement photos. My mother came in flushed with wine and announced wonderful news in the pleased tone she used for Vanessa Bennett. She said the whole family was going to Paris because Ethan Brooks wanted to celebrate the engagement. My hand stopped in the soapy water when she said they were flying out Friday night. Graduation was Saturday morning, and I turned around slowly because the dates could not both be real. I reminded her that my graduation was Saturday and that I had to deliver the main speech. She waved that away and said I would be wonderful, as if praise could replace presents. Then she said something I would hear in my nightmares for weeks. "You don't need us there." She told me I had always been self-sufficient, while Vanessa Bennett needed family support during this change. My father appeared behind her and backed the decision without ever once meeting my eyes. He said I was strong and did not need them the way my sister did. And the room lurched. I gripped the counter because my vision blurred at the edges and pain stabbed behind my left eye. They finally noticed I looked pale. But even then, concern felt like an inconvenience on their schedule. I muttered that I had an early shift and left before they could dress their cruelty as logic. In the parking lot, I sat in the dark for 10 minutes with both hands gripping the wheel. Then I drove home to my apartment and cried so hard I could not catch a full breath. 3 days before graduation, I lay on my floor because even getting up felt like too much. Over speakerphone, Sophie Carter repeated the truth back to me. They were skipping graduation for a trip. I called it an engagement celebration, and she told me to stop making excuses for people like them. I said I was only accepting reality, and she said that was even sadder than denial. She asked how I felt physically because my voice had sounded wrong even the day before. I said I was fine again, and again it was a lie I was too tired to defend. That night, I woke at 3 a.m. with the worst headache of my entire life. The pain made me whimper as I stumbled to the bathroom and found blood pouring from my nose. This time, it was heavier, darker, and longer, and I sat on cold tile waiting it out alone. 20 minutes passed before the bleeding slowed enough for me to see my face in the mirror. Hollow cheeks, bruised eyes, pale skin. I looked like someone fading in front of herself. I thought again that I should see a doctor, and again I told myself there was no time. Graduation was 3 days away, and I still had a speech to memorize through the pounding pain. I texted Sophie Carter that I was fine, and then opened an old Christmas photo with my grandfather. In that picture, only Grandpa Arthur Bennett stood beside me, smiling directly into the camera. I saved his number as another emergency contact and told myself it was only a precaution. Then I swallowed more ibuprofen and made a desperate promise to survive just 3 more days. If you have ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to love you, I saw you too. If you were the one everyone relied on, yet never truly noticed, comment invisible, because I understand. And if you want to know what happened at graduation, stay with me, because I still relive it. The day before graduation, Grandpa Arthur Bennett called while I practiced my speech for the 100th time. He asked if I was ready, and I laughed weakly because ready was not the right word at all. Then he said he was driving in that night and staying near campus so he could arrive early. My throat tightened because no one had ever rearranged their life just to show up for mine. He said he had to give me something, a gift Grandma Evelyn Bennett had saved for my graduation. She had made him promise to wait until I finished college because she always knew I would. I asked what it was, but he only said I would see tomorrow and understand then. Before hanging up, he asked whether my father had ever mentioned an old offer about tuition. I said no, because my father always claimed my grandfather could only help one granddaughter financially. Grandpa Arthur Bennett gave a bitter little laugh and asked if that was really what I had been told. He said we would talk after the ceremony, but for now, I needed to remember I was not alone. When the call ended, confusion circled my thoughts, but pain chased every question back into silence. Graduation morning began with a pounding headache and a text from my mother sent from Paris. She wrote, "Just landed. Have a great graduation, sweetie. So proud of you," and attached a family selfie. There they all were at the airport, smiling without guilt, like they had not abandoned me at all. I did not answer, because any response would have broken into grief, and I still had to stand. At 9 o'clock, Sophie Carter picked me up and frowned the instant she saw my face. She said I looked gray, not nervous, gray, and forced me to eat half a granola bar. I managed 3 bites before my stomach turned, but she kept driving with one hand on the wheel. Campus buzzed with balloons, flowers, cameras, and proud families gathering everywhere my eyes accidentally landed. I tried not to look too long at parents straightening gowns and holding bouquets for daughters like me. In the staging area, another text from my mother arrived, asking me to send pictures of everything. They wanted to see the whole moment without having to witness any of it in person. Then I opened my university emergency contact form and saw only my parents' names still listed there. On impulse, I added Grandpa Arthur Bennett beneath them because suddenly that felt more truthful. I do not know whether instinct saved me or whether love simply knows where it belongs. Then I saw him in the front row, already waiting, holding a manila envelope across his lap. Grandpa Arthur Bennett waved, and for the first time all week, I felt my lungs fully open. A stage manager approached and said, "Claire Bennett, you're up in 10 minutes." And my heartbeat jumped. I told myself 10 minutes was survivable, that I only needed to remain standing a little longer. 3,000 people filled the seats, and the sun turned my black gown into a furnace. My name echoed through the speakers, and I walked to the podium one deliberate step at a time. Applause rose around me, loud and generous, and for a second, I almost forgot I was alone. I found Grandpa Arthur Bennett in the crowd and saw Sophie Carter beside him recording with her phone. 2 seats next to them sat empty, reserved for family members who had chosen Paris over me. I cleared my throat and began thanking the people who believed in me when I could not. The speech lived inside me by then, memorized through sleepless nights, coffee, and relentless determination. But halfway through the first paragraph, the stage shifted beneath my feet like the world had tilted. My vision narrowed to a tunnel, and the microphone slipped a little against my damp fingers. I heard my own voice from far away, strange and fragile, still trying to finish the sentence. Then pain exploded behind my eyes, white-hot and blinding, stronger than fear and faster than thought. I saw Grandpa Arthur Bennett's face change from pride to terror in a single unbearable instant. I saw Sophie Carter stand up, the empty seats beside her, and then the world disappeared. My body hit the stage floor, and the impact cracked through the crowd before I heard screams. Somewhere above me, people yelled for doctors, for ambulances, for someone to call my family. Hands touched my face, while Sophie Carter's voice shook and begged me to answer her. Grandpa Arthur Bennett gripped my hand and kept saying he was there, that he was right there. I tried to tell them I was okay, but darkness had already risen to take me under. The last thing I heard was a stranger asking if anyone had my parents' phone numbers. Even as everything blackened, one thought flickered through me. They would not answer those calls. What happened next was told to me later because I remember none of the ambulance ride itself. I was unconscious for all 14 minutes while paramedics worked over me and rushed me to the ER. At the hospital, scans came fast, and every new image made the doctors' faces more serious. A neurosurgeon told Sophie Carter and Grandpa Arthur Bennett that a tumor pressed on my frontal lobe. He said surgery had to happen within the hour if they wanted any chance of preventing worse damage. Then came the question that should have been simple. Who could provide family consent for the operation? Sophie Carter called my parents once, twice, 3 times, and each call went straight to voicemail. She left messages saying it was an emergency, that I was in the hospital and needed them now. Nothing came back. Not even a text, not even a second of panic from the people who raised me. Then Grandpa Arthur Bennett called his son directly and got through only as they were boarding. He said Claire Bennett had collapsed, had a brain tumor, and was going into surgery in 40 minutes. My father answered with a calmness so chilling it sounded less like shock and more like inconvenience. He said they were about to take off and asked whether his father could simply handle things there. Grandpa Arthur Bennett repeated that his daughter needed emergency brain surgery, and my father still hesitated. He said the flight was long, and that by the time they returned, I would be out anyway. Then my grandfather told him clearly that if he boarded that plane, he should not call again. My father boarded the plane. My mother boarded. Vanessa Bennett boarded. All of them chose Paris. Because I had added him that morning, Grandpa Arthur Bennett signed the consent forms as emergency contact. When they wheeled me into surgery, only 2 people waited for me, my grandfather and my best friend. While surgeons opened my skull to save my life, my family rose 30,000 feet toward vacation photos. I woke 3 days later to white walls, white sheets, and a hospital silence heavy with waiting. The first person I saw was Grandpa Arthur Bennett, asleep in a chair wearing the same graduation suit. Then I noticed Sophie Carter curled on a cot in the corner, exhausted, and still somehow present. My throat felt like glass when I tried to speak, and Sophie Carter was beside me immediately. She cried the instant she realized I was conscious, and Grandpa Arthur Bennett looked close to breaking too. I asked what happened, though the stitches and weakness told me the answer had to be severe. Carefully, Sophie Carter said I had a brain tumor, that they removed it, and I would recover. Surgery had happened 3 days earlier, and I had been unconscious for every hour since then. I turned my head and saw my phone charging by the bed, close enough to feel dangerous. I asked about my parents, and no one answered immediately, which told me almost everything already. Sophie Carter handed me the phone and suggested maybe I should wait. But I opened Instagram first. There it was. My family smiling before the Eiffel Tower at sunset, posted 18 hours before. The caption said, "Family trip in Paris. Finally, no stress, no drama," with bright hashtags beneath. I kept scrolling through cafe photos, champagne glasses, designer outfits, and not one mention of me. Grandpa Arthur Bennett said they knew I was in the hospital because he had called them himself. I stared at the words, "no stress, no drama," and understood that to them, I was both. I closed the app without crying, because surgery had left me too weak for tears or fury. 4 days after the operation, doctors said the tumor was benign and that they had caught it in time. I focused on healing, not posting, not calling, not confronting, just trying to exist inside my own body. Grandpa Arthur Bennett visited daily, and Sophie Carter practically lived in my room beside him. The nurses knew their names because real love leaves a pattern in places where fear once lived. One evening, after Sophie Carter went home to shower, I finally sat alone with my thoughts. That was when my phone lit up with 1 missed call from my father, then 5, then 20. Eventually, the screen showed 65 missed calls and 23 texts stacking into a frantic wall. My father wrote, "Call me back. Important." Then, "We need to talk now." Then, "Urgent." My mother's only message said I should call my father, and Vanessa Bennett asked what I had done. Not one message asked how I felt, whether I was in pain or if I had been scared. Not one message said sorry, said love, said daughter, said anything except that they needed me. I showed the screen to Grandpa Arthur Bennett, and his face hardened with a tired kind of anger. He said they knew now, and I asked what exactly they had only just learned, too late. He took a long breath and said they were not calling because they feared losing Claire Bennett. They were calling because he had told them about my grandmother's gift and what they might lose instead. The room seemed to chill despite the blankets, and I asked what gift could cause that kind of panic. Grandpa Arthur Bennett moved his chair closer and took my hand like he was about to reopen history. He said that when I was born, he and Grandma Evelyn Bennett created a fund in my name. It was not just for education, but for freedom, a future, a down payment on any dream I chose. My grandmother called it my Freedom Fund and wanted it given directly to me on graduation day. I asked how much it held, and he said enough to change a young life in one decision. Then he revealed he had also given my parents 2 equal checks years earlier for both granddaughters' tuition. One check was for Vanessa Bennett, one was for Claire Bennett, and both were cashed the same day. I stared at him because my father had always said no such money existed for me at all. Grandpa Arthur Bennett showed me a bank statement proving the withdrawals and the equal amounts side by side. Vanessa Bennett's share went to college. Mine disappeared, and suddenly our renovated kitchen made perfect sense. I whispered that they had spent my tuition money, and he said he believed exactly that. He admitted he had told my father about the Freedom Fund while I was in surgery, furious and betrayed. He had warned that if they did not return, I would receive everything directly without them involved. That was why they were calling now, not because I had almost died, but because their access had closed. The next afternoon, I heard my family before I saw them. Heels, loud voices, and practiced concern. Sophie Carter rose from her chair, and I asked her to stay no matter what my mother requested. My mother swept into the room first, saying they came as fast as they could, every syllable polished. I repeated slowly that they had arrived 5 days after I nearly died, and her face tightened. She muttered something about flights being booked, but Instagram had shown the Louvre less than a day before. My father entered next without meeting my eyes, and Vanessa Bennett followed, carrying shopping bags into my room. She told me I looked better than expected, and Sophie Carter's silence across the room practically vibrated. I reminded her I had brain surgery, and she answered, "I know, that's crazy," as if discussing weather. Then she added they had cut the trip short, like I should feel grateful for that sacrifice. My mother asked to speak privately as a family, and I told her Sophie Carter was staying. She had held my hand before surgery, been there when I woke up, and earned the right to remain. Then Grandpa Arthur Bennett entered, and the temperature in that room dropped without any machine changing. He said he saw they had finally found time in their schedules, and no one had a defense ready. My father tried to speak rationally, but my grandfather asked how rational choosing Paris over surgery really was. My mother said it was a family matter, and he answered that Claire Bennett was his family too. Then he asked my father simple questions. My birthday, favorite book, best friend, first teaching job. My father could not answer. Sophie Carter could have answered everyone without thinking for a second. Vanessa Bennett rolled her eyes and said they had not flown home to play 20 questions in a hospital. Grandpa Arthur Bennett said no. They flew back because they heard about the money and feared losing it. Anya. My mother claimed they came because I was sick, but his voice cut straight through the lie. He said the inheritance belonged to Claire Bennett, not the family, not a wedding, not a remodel. Then something shifted in my mother's face, and anger pushed past the mask she had worn for years. She said if we wanted truth, then truth was exactly what we would finally have in that room. She turned toward me with wet eyes and said every time she looked at me, she saw someone else. I asked who, though part of me already knew from old photos and older silences around my face. She said Grandma Evelyn Bennett's name like a wound she had been biting shut for decades. She described years of feeling judged, dismissed, and never good enough for my grandmother or that family. Then she said Grandma Evelyn Bennett died, and she believed the judgment died with her at last. But I was born looking exactly like her. The same eyes, the same chin, the same features. She said every time she looked at Claire Bennett, she saw Grandma Evelyn Bennett staring back in judgment. Sophie Carter snapped that none of that had ever been my fault, and my mother screamed that she knew. Yet knowing it changed nothing, because for 22 years she had still treated me like a reminder. I sat there weak from surgery, realizing my mother had punished a child for another woman's face. I told her I understood now that she had been hurt, but that pain had never belonged to me. Hope flickered in her eyes, as if understanding might become forgiveness before truth had even settled. I told her I had done everything right for 22 years, trying to finally be seen and loved. Perfect grades, no trouble, extra jobs, every holiday, every party, every crisis where they needed help. I said I kept believing if I worked hard enough, she would love me the way she loved Vanessa Bennett. But I was wrong, because she was always going to see Grandma Evelyn Bennett before she ever saw me. Then I turned to my father and said he had watched all of it happen without stopping it once. He started to say he did not know how to handle it, and I asked how hard protection really was. I told him he had chosen the path of least resistance, and that path had required sacrificing me. Looking at all of them, I said I did not hate them, but I could not keep pretending anymore. I said I wanted to be seen as a person, not a burden, a ghost, or a useful backup. And if they could not do that, I would grieve the family I wished for and build my own. Silence filled the room while Grandpa Arthur Bennett placed the manila envelope into my waiting hands. He said Grandma Evelyn Bennett had set it aside 25 years earlier and let time grow it for me. My parents watched the envelope like people staring at a door that had just closed in their faces. I told them plainly I would not use that money to fund Vanessa Bennett's wedding or rescue their plans. Vanessa Bennett called me selfish and said family should share what belongs to the family. I asked whether family was the same group smiling in Paris while I was in brain surgery. She tried to say she did not know it was serious, and I answered that she never even asked. I told them I was taking the money not to hurt them, but because it was mine by right. It was meant to give Claire Bennett options and freedom from people who always treated her as an afterthought. My father asked if they were supposed to lose me now, and the answer came easier than expected. I told him they had lost me years earlier, the day they stopped showing up and stopped asking. Still, I did not close the door entirely. I said they could try if they were willing to change. But any attempt would be slow, boundaried, honest, and centered on seeing Claire Bennett, not a ghost. Vanessa Bennett stormed out first, furious that truth had finally become more expensive than denial. My mother cried real tears then, and whispered that she had been wrong, deeply and unbearably wrong. I told her if she truly wanted to try, she needed therapy and the courage to face her pain. She nodded, wiped her face, and left without another argument because there was no defense left to make. Then my father sat beside my bed and admitted quietly that he had failed me for years. He said he hid behind my strength because it was easier than confronting the weakness inside our family. I studied his face and saw remorse there, awkward and late, but real enough to consider. I told him to call me next week and ask how I was doing. Then really listen. He promised he would, squeezed my hand once, and walked out looking older than when he entered. 2 weeks later, doctors discharged me with a clean bill of health and called the timing miraculous. I called it a second chance and chose not to spend it returning to the house that broke me. I used a small piece of Grandma Evelyn Bennett's gift to rent a tiny apartment near my new school. It had 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a parking lot view, and more peace than I had ever known. It was not glamorous, but every corner belonged to Claire Bennett, and that made it beautiful to me. The fallout began fast. Vanessa Bennett blocked me on every platform and posted bitter lines about family. I screenshotted her new bio and sent it to Sophie Carter, who replied with angry emojis and joy. Days later, Sophie Carter called sounding delighted because Ethan Brooks had heard the hospital story. His family learned what happened, and he began reconsidering the engagement he had once celebrated so publicly. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired, because other people's collapse never healed my own wounds. Soon the engagement party photos disappeared online. Then the announcement itself vanished from every page. My mother texted that Vanessa Bennett was devastated and hoped I was happy with what happened. I answered that I was not happy about her pain, but neither was I responsible for its cause. To his credit, my father called the next Tuesday exactly when he said he would call. The conversation was awkward, careful, and new. But for the first time, he asked about dinner. Such a small question should not have mattered so much, and yet it nearly made me smile. 3 months later, I stood in my own classroom arranging desks for 26 8th-grade students. Sophie Carter helped by criticizing my poster placement while eating my chips and making me laugh anyway. The room slowly became mine. Thrifted shelves, a reading corner, and a bulletin board that said every voice matters. My phone buzzed with Grandpa Arthur Bennett's name, and warmth moved through me before I even answered. He asked about the classroom setup and reminded me of Sunday dinner like it was sacred routine. Then he said he had found a letter Grandma Evelyn Bennett wrote to her future granddaughter long ago. I sat in my teacher's chair stunned, because she had written to me before I was even born. After that call, I looked around the room I had built and felt, maybe for the first time, right. 1 month later, a knock on my apartment door revealed my father holding a worn cardboard box. He said he should have called first, but there he stood anyway, uncertain and trying not to retreat. I let him in, and he looked around at the plants, photos, and student art covering my small place. Then he placed the box on my table and told me to open it when I was ready. Inside were photo albums, old books, and a hand-embroidered handkerchief that had belonged to Grandma Evelyn Bennett. My father said my mother had planned to throw the items away, but he could not let that happen. He said he knew he could not fix 22 years, but he wanted me to know where I came from. I saw then how tired he looked. How much shame can age a person when excuses stop working? I told him trying would mean showing up consistently, not when guilt was sharpest or easiest. He nodded, accepted the terms, and for the first time in years, we shared a quiet cup of coffee. 6 months after graduation, I sat in my empty classroom after the last bell grading student essays. One of my quietest students, Eli Turner, knocked and asked if he could ask me something personal. He stepped inside, small and hesitant, and asked whether I had ever felt like no one saw me. My heart clenched because children always find the truth adults spend years trying to bury. I told Eli Turner, yes, for a very long time, I had felt exactly that way. He asked what I did, and I told him I found people who truly saw me. I said Grandpa Arthur Bennett, Sophie Carter, and eventually Claire Bennett herself had done that work. Then I told him, once you know your own worth, you stop begging the world to name it for you. After he left, I looked at an old photo my grandfather found of me with Grandma Evelyn Bennett. She was smiling down at me, like I was the most important thing in her entire world. I used to think love was earned through sacrifice, silence, and endless proof of usefulness to others. Now I know love is who shows up, who stays, and who does not need your suffering to value you. 1 year after graduation, my phone lit up with a number I had not seen in months. Vanessa Bennett. I almost let it ring out, but I answered because curiosity and history can sound alike at first. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it, and she said Ethan Brooks had left for good. His family, she said, did not want ties to a family that abandoned a daughter in the hospital. Then she admitted she was in debt, that credit cards and appearances had grown beyond what she could hide. She asked what she was supposed to do now, and for once there was no arrogance in her tone. I asked why she was calling me after everything, and she said I was the only one not using her. I heard real tears then, the kind pain forces out when performance finally fails and loneliness answers instead. Part of me wanted to tell her this was justice, but that would only repeat what had hurt me. So I said I was sorry she was hurting, but I could not rescue her from consequences anymore. I could not pay debts, fix relationships, or return to the role of invisible family support system. She asked why I answered at all, and I said because she was my sister, and I did not hate her. After a long silence, Vanessa Bennett admitted she had been terrible to me for reasons she barely understood. She said maybe she had been jealous because I worked for everything while she was simply handed things. Then she asked if we could ever be okay, and I gave the only honest answer I had. I said I did not know yet, but if she was willing to do the work, I was willing to try. 2 years after graduation, I sat beside Sophie Carter in a crowded auditorium, waiting for an awards ceremony. The banner behind the podium read, Community Educator of the Year, and this time the applause was for him. When Grandpa Arthur Bennett walked to the stage, 80 years old and still steady, my chest tightened. He accepted the award, then said he wanted to dedicate it to someone else, his granddaughter, Claire Bennett. He told the audience he had watched me collapse on graduation day and nearly lose my life. He said I woke to find absent people still absent, yet chose not bitterness but a better life. He spoke about me teaching now, helping children believe they matter for who they are, not what they do. Then he quoted Grandma Evelyn Bennett, who believed the forgotten people of the world most needed remembering. Through tears, I watched him raise that award toward me and call my choice to save myself courage. After the ceremony, I held him so tightly, it felt like gratitude had finally found a shape. My family is still complicated. My father calls every Tuesday. My mother sends careful holiday cards. Vanessa Bennett is in therapy now, and sometimes we text. Slowly, awkwardly, like strangers testing a bridge. But my real family is the one that stayed. Sophie Carter, Grandpa Arthur Bennett, my students, and me. If you stayed with me this far, I want to tell you what I finally understand about all of it. My mother was not born a villain. She was a wounded person who never healed what hurt her first. Psychologists call it projection, when unresolved pain spills onto someone innocent standing in the wrong shape. She saw Grandma Evelyn Bennett in my face and let that old wound poison 22 years between us. And my own weakness had a name too. People-pleasing, the survival habit that nearly erased me. I kept believing that if I sacrificed enough and achieved enough, they would finally choose to see me. The brain tumor was the most terrifying thing I had ever faced, but it forced clarity into my life. It showed me exactly who loved Claire Bennett and who only loved what Claire Bennett could provide for them. So here is what I learned, and I hope you carry it if you are living any part of this now. You cannot earn love from people who are unwilling to give it, no matter how perfect you become. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they are not even watching you burn. Real family is not decided by blood alone. It is decided by who shows up when life breaks open. And choosing yourself is not selfish when survival is on the line. Sometimes it is the bravest thing. If you are the invisible one, the forgotten one, the giver who keeps receiving emptiness, I see you. Learn your worth before desperation convinces you to trade your whole life for scraps of approval again. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story and holding space for all its pain. If you have your own story about family, boundaries, or finding your worth, leave it in the comments. I read every one because I know what it means to feel unseen and finally be answered by someone. And if this meant something to you, like, subscribe and ring the bell because another story is waiting.